Good evening. My name is Keisha Rogers, and I want to welcome you to this evening's LaRouche Strategic Update for December 11th. And tonight's discussion is going to be titled, Take Down the Blob, End the Wars, Rebuild the Nation. I want to first start off, before I bring in Michael Stager to give us an opening and give us a sense of what is happening strategically in the country and around the world. I would like to start off with the campaign initiative that is central to a very important fight that has to be taken up by every single person on this call listening live, and also who will be listening to the recording on Rumble or YouTube following. And LaRouche PAC has initiated a campaign calling for stopping the National Defense Authorization Act. And I want to bring this front and center because this week, the Congress is now in an all-out debate around the new Defense Act, which is about $848 billion authorization. And this is all taking place with appropriations bills and so forth this week prior to Congress supposing to leave on Friday. And what is one of the number one components in this National Defense Authorization Bill, which must be stopped immediately, is the continued drive for censorship of the American people, pushing FISA warrants on the American people. And I want to just point out what LaRouche PAC is calling for in terms of this very important action for everyone to take, demanding that the House vote no on the treasonous domestic spying bill. We already know we've seen a number of whistleblowers come out and expose the actions that have been done by various private groups, British intelligence, and others that have been spying on the American people. And this has been an area that Barbara Boyd has done a lot of intelligence reports and covered a lot. But let me just point out to you that we're calling on everyone to call your Congress members this week to demand that the House vote no on this domestic spying bill. The National Defense Authorization Act actually includes over 3,000 pages. And this is one of the key components of it. And let me just say that there's a piece, an opinion piece today by Senator Mike Lee, where he wrote demanding that senators not pass the defense bill without a FISA reform. He reminds the senators that the FBI used Section 702, which is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, to conduct warrantless backdoor searches of private electronic communications of American citizens. And we know all of this had to do and has been exposed continuously with the Twitter files, the Facebook files, and other exposures warning of these actions that have been taken against the American population, against parents, against those who voted for or who were involved in President Trump's campaign and who went after the lies or the fraud around the 2022 election, 2020 election. So this has to be stopped immediately. And I wanted to put that front and center to people's attention. Now, this also goes hand in hand, our call for stopping the NDAA Authorization Act with what President Trump, I don't know if people had a chance to see, President Trump spoke, was the highlight speaker at the New York Young Republicans Gala over the weekend. And it was a lot of people giving speeches and presentations, but I want to highlight a couple of key points that President Trump made that go hand in hand to his commitment, one, to continuing his call that he's going to put an end to the endless wars, what he has done with his administration in the past, with the Abraham Accords and bringing peace to the Middle East. And also, he made this a very, very strong priority in his speech. What he also made a priority is going into 2025 at the start of his presidency, he called for restoring constitutional government by the people and said that he would move to break up the Biden administration's illegal censorship regime. Any official which has violated Americans' constitutional rights will be held accountable. And he calls for canceling the Biden administration's artificial intelligence executive order, and warned that we are in dangerous times having to do with censoring free speech of American citizens. So this action that must be taken by the American people is only one step to taking down the blob and ending the endless wars. But I think Michael's going to take us a step further in terms of looking at all of this hinges upon a total cultural transformation and economic transformation, that the number one fight at hand is that we have to rebuild our economy. And our LaRouche PAC members and content creators, so forth, have been focusing on this continuously. We had a very important discussion on this past weekend with Bruce Director and Tony Papert on Lyndon LaRouche's idea of his discoveries of economic principles, the science of physical economy, and the question of creativity per se. So I'm going to turn it over to Michael now so he can take us a little bit further on what is the nature of the fight we're embarking upon and what your role and your responsibility in this fight is.
Great. Thanks, Keisha. Hi, everyone. Good Monday evening to you. Keisha just mentioned the NDAA bill. And this, I think, gives us a gateway into what I wanted to expand tonight and somewhat follow up on the discussions the last couple of Mondays. It's noteworthy that Jack Smith, the prosecutor, the special prosecutor, focusing on kind of assassinating Trump legal, in the courts, has gone into panic mode. Trump has appealed the case in DC regarding January 6th on the grounds that, one, it requires an extension of the date because they're trying to hold this like the Monday of Super Tuesday, right before Super Tuesday in early March. And there's just huge volumes. 40,000 hours of J6 tapes have now been released by the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. But Trump has appealed it on the grounds that he has presidential immunity. He was acting in his official capacity as a president. And it's not, you can't hold him. You can't say he's now, you can prosecute him once he's out of office. If he's going to be prosecuted, he's impeached and thrown out. Otherwise, he's not just an officer of the United States. He is the government of the United States. At least he is one entire branch, in essence, of the United States government. And so he appealed to the appellate court in DC, and basically it took it out of Judge Chutkan's hands just by that appeal. So Smith and really the DOJ, really this is the Obama coup apparatus, Lisa Monaco, that, as we talked about last week, in terms of this new intelligence, said 2016 can never happen again. So they decided to push it up to the Supreme Court. And this is, you'll understand if you didn't already, why they've been attacking Clarence Thomas, threatening assassinations of Alito or Kavanaugh or Gorsuch or Amy Coney Barrett, and the other conservative justices, because it's clear that there was going to be major decisions by the Supreme Court to either defend the Constitution or implicitly or explicitly support this attempted destruction of the Constitution and our electoral system. So we'll see. We'll see if the Supreme Court has guts. We'll see if Mike Johnson has guts. The reason this NDAA is getting even considered is because the intelligence community has come down on him, as Chuck Schumer said famously after the 2016 election. They'll come after you 6 ways to Sunday. And he said that about Trump, who was comparing the intelligence community to the Nazis. He did that at a Trump Tower rally in December of 2016. And they're coming at Mike Johnson 6 ways from Sunday. And it's going to be a question of mobilizing to the extent we can. But I know that we're not the only group calling this out. I got another email from a very active group here in Michigan. It's probably happening throughout the country, that there's a mobilization to say, call your congressman. It's going to leave the Senate's hands and comes to the House sometime this week. You know, we've seen it that a handful of Republicans who really fight in the House can make the difference and blow stuff up and recruit others to enforce the issue and change the political discourse of the country. But at the same time, we all know something. So that's critical, as Keisha just said. But we also know that this country can't continue to be, we can't save the country by emergency mobilization after emergency mobilization. So as much as that's absolutely warranted in this case, and you should call your congressman, or especially if you don't have a Republican congressman, some Democrats are actually open to this. They know it goes back to the Patriot Act. It goes back to just the basic questions of surveillance state operations. Some Democrats are actually willing to be decent on this and break with the party line, the Obama party line. But call up Republicans in your state. Call up, you know, people like Gates or Marjorie Taylor Greene or others who have fought before, and actually have them fight and make a stink about this and put Johnson over the rack, that maybe he doesn't have what it takes to be Speaker of the House. So, but what we are forced to address is that if we're going to save our country, and I believe in doing so, save civilization, because if you look at it right now, Ukraine is about to collapse. I mean, the entire process, the front line of the Ukrainian military is about to collapse. Major fortified areas that are like the critical juncture points of the Ukrainian defense line are breaking down. And the Russians are preparing for, I'm sure, numerous different types of assaults. But it's not just that. The Ukrainian population has been decimated. Much of it has moved to Poland, Eastern Europe, Central Europe, and into even Germany and Western Europe. Tons of Ukrainians in Ireland. The government itself, Zelensky is going to be here tomorrow, genuflecting, meeting with Biden, meeting with the speaker. I mean, this guy's may not even be president by the time he gets back to Ukraine. He may not even make it back to Ukraine. He might just go to Miami to his beach house because they've pulled a coup in Kiev. When this thing is collapsing rapidly. If he doesn't get the money, there's a good chance he doesn't. Let's put it that way. So Ukraine is collapsing, and Ukraine is an example of what what you might call the blob, or you might just want to call it like a massive tapeworm. It's a parasitic blob that is sucking the very life out of any country it touches. That's how this British Empire works. That's how an imperial process works. It works by parasiting, living off of pre-developed civilizational and industrial wealth. This is how the Nazis basically decided to take what had built up as a German industrial capacity and just and the talent of the workforce and just grind it down into a massive explosive war machine, but unsustainable. But this is how an empire works, and it's doing it to us. And as I mentioned last week, a major factor for young people today And this is young people in the United States, it's young people in Europe, it's young people in Israel or Japan or China, and any major developed part of the world. Young people are increasingly sense of hopelessness, a sense of loneliness, a lack of mission, a lack of purpose, either a lack of interest or a lack of commitment. Even places, I mean, in China, there was a study done where affluent couples were looked at, and they were like, we don't want to have kids because the pressure our parents put on us was so high. We don't want to do that to our own children. So family formation, getting married, the idea of, and it's, a lot of this is summed up if you ask a young person, do you think you'll ever buy a home? They go, I'll never buy a home. That to me was common with friends I had when I grew up in California, when I was in high school. But I knew it wasn't common back in the Midwest where I was from. Now it's just everywhere. It's everywhere. And so there's something that has to be addressed there. If you look at what happened in 2008, like we talked about last week in these bailouts, and then last week we covered some of the social media angle and how this has been run to feed this kind of anti-American, Summer of Floyd, riots, anger, socialism, chaos, factions in the streets, the kind of radical left. But I want to discuss a little bit more of what Trump's presidency really can mean, even beyond what Trump himself might say. And I say that's to be specific, that the crisis we're dealing with and the power and potential of Trump's presidency is so great, we have to make sure it is massively successful, not just at easing the pain, but really getting at the cause, and you might say, of ripping out this parasitic force, this parasitic worm, this kind of ubiquitous blob that seems to govern our entire way our society seems to function. It's got to get rid of that. And the way we're going to do that is by no means peppering Congress with phone calls at each emergency, but it is to build a movement that is far outside the Republican Party demographic targets. I mean, those have expanded under Trump and it's blue collar and so on, but it really is to go steal the Democratic Party base. As has been mentioned before, polling indicates Trump's already winning the younger demographics, especially the 18 to 25, 18 to 29 might be a little bit tighter, but once you get into the 30s and early 40s, Trump is increasingly dominant. And that tells you that people that are having a greater sense of where the society and economy are actually going, they're far more afraid. But they're also well aware of this process of the bailouts of 2008, 2009. Just to put that in short quantitative terms. In 2008, our national debt was $10 trillion. Today, it's about $34 trillion. Now, that went up with Trump to some degree, but it really went up under Obama. And so you're talking about 20, and it went up with Trump largely because of the COVID phenomena, which was, of course, an intelligence-run operation, NSA, and so on. You're talking $23 trillion of additional debt. Had that debt been used to finance the industrial development of the country, to build infrastructure, to get the space program moving, to get entrepreneurs like Musk who are developing the space capabilities or other industrial capabilities or fusion, nuclear power plants, all the things we've talked many times. Had we put it towards that, young people wouldn't have a problem at all today. I mean, young people always have problems. You're young, you got a lot to work through. But the point is, you'd have an economy and a society moving upwards. When you do what they did, when you bail out a financial system, you make the problem, you double down on building up the problem to be even bigger while literally stealing the future from younger generations. So even if Trump is winning those poll numbers, I don't rely on poll numbers. I don't think any of you do either. We all know this is going to come down to the wire. We can't even at this point, even though Trump is destroying his Republican competition in the primaries, Trump is focusing on 3 states, Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina. He's taking nothing for granted. What we've got to make sure we can do and mobilize in every state that we're active in. And each state that may be a little bit different, but we should be discussing more and more on these calls. How do we actually begin to get our friends, our collaborators, the activists we know in our states? Because in every state there are huge amounts of activists, and I can almost guarantee to 100% perfection, the Republican Party in their county and in their state is not up to the job, not up to snuff. It's not going to get the job done. And so we've got to be willing to take initiative, create the deployments, create the political and social structures, find the groups that want to get active, because there are groups outside the parties, or there are groups within the party itself, not the party leadership or the party as a whole, but within the party, in some cases, maybe the leadership, who do want to get active. It's now time to start to mobilize that citizen army, that wide awake movement that Lincoln had, into this direction. And part of the target is to recruit these younger members of society. These young people wanting to form families, or the ones that have and can recognize that there's a problem, to really understand what Trump is targeting when he goes after the global financial elite. When he says, we are going to wage, I want you to join the greatest strike against the corrupt financial elite. In his first administration, when he decided to move towards Glass-Steagall and go after the Wall Street control of banking, when he went after the independence of the Fed, that these are indications that Trump does understand where the fight is. But his ability to go there and to fight effectively in these terms, he even himself recently in New York, but also earlier, has said we're on the verge of another major Great Depression. And it may happen before the election, but it likely may happen after I'm back in the presidency. That's probably part of what the enemy sees as a way of disrupting his administration, because they figure if he's only got 4 years, it took Roosevelt 12 years and a war mobilization to really build us out of the economy. Now, Roosevelt did, though, take major steps in his first 4 years. Lincoln took major steps in his first 4 years. It can be done in 4 years, even with, and perhaps even more so because of a financial crisis. But it's for us to understand the nature of this parasitic force. Now, the NDAA gets that part of it. You see that it's destroyed Ukraine. You see that it may destroy Israel. Netanyahu's biggest claim to fame is that he can basically control U.S. foreign policy towards Israel. What Israel is doing right now, are they at war with Hamas? Did Hamas declare war on October 7th? Absolutely. But if you go into a reckless program of forever war, well, that doesn't work out well. That's a blob policy. That is the great sucking sound of the tapeworm sucking the life out of our civilization, getting happier and happier and hungrier, thinking about the perpetual war that could take place in the Middle East. And you're never going to eradicate Hamas if Hamas is a terrorist network that recruits during major periods of warfare. So that gives us some sense, and we've seen this. Even if you look at the military complex, we've been at war for 20 years. That means that we should have a major military and industrial component to our economy, the ability for massive production of necessary war equipment. Well, everyone on this call probably is well aware we can't produce anywhere near what the Russians are producing right now for war with Ukraine. And they've only been at war for 2 years. Now, it's a different kind of warfare. It's traditional, real warfare. It's not kind of fighting like insurgent terrorist groups in former colonial areas, almost like colonial occupation wars. That's what in Iraq, we bribed all the generals to leave. The march to Baghdad was a breeze because we bribed everyone. So it wasn't like it was hard to take Baghdad, but then we occupied. The same is true with the Taliban in Afghanistan. So we haven't really been in real war. And our military industrial complex, there's a new law that could be passed or has been passed, but has yet gone into effect, which will begin to indicate who owns the armament production industries. And what you'll find, or what the Pentagon's going to find, or be forced to address, is that much of the armament production we have in this country, not the big stuff that's Lockheed Martin and other things, but some of the smaller, more specific items of basic artillery and so on, are going to be owned by private equity funds. In some cases, the private equity funds have monopolized and then jacked up the price 500% to bilk the Pentagon's and our taxpayer money for basic artillery items or other components for our military systems. In some cases, those private equity funds have been funded by foreign countries. This is how our society has increasingly come to function. And so when you talk about the problem as a whole, you recognize that we've got a parasitic entity that's premise is to bilk the American taxpayer, both of tax money, while at the same time using the Federal Reserve and central banking system to print excessive amounts of money to make sure that the financial values of equities, stocks, real estate in certain cases, and other items continue to go up in price. Medical costs, education costs, all continue to go up in price while lowering the actual value of the income of the working class Americans. This system has to be targeted. And the major aspect of that is the question of the 2008 and 2009 bailouts. At that point, this society committed a major crime. But it wasn't a crime to many people who were holding major asset values. It was going to mostly be impacting and be felt by the generation of young people coming into age, into maturity, around really almost like 2016. You know, when Hillary Clinton was supposed to come in and basically ensure that the surveillance state, Wall Street, the globalists had full control. And Trump's presidency and in some cases, probably because of that dynamic, this process shifted. So implicit in Trump's Agenda 47, to build the 10 new cities, to build hundreds and hundreds of power plants, to rebuild our manufacturing and make us a manufacturing superpower, to deal with the overall process of securing, things like Social Security and securing the border and dealing with the censorship and radical agendas in education. But a big portion of this lies at the heart of this parasitic force. And that is this international global financial banking system. So when we say that the economy is where we've got to focus, it's not simply a question of an electoral win, an election win. It is that this is the core of what the enemy has had to protect. They've got to keep looting. That's how they stay alive. That's how they function. It's not different if you have any Greek friends. I had a great Greek friend, and he would tell stories about, because if you know Greeks, they tell stories about ancient Greece, where, entire areas, geographic regions of ancient Greece, where the people just lived as pirates. Trading ships would come by and they would go and target it and loot it. It was a piracy as an economy. But modern civilization is premised on what we discussed, what our colleagues Tony and Bruce discussed on Saturday. Our civilization's notion of economy is premised on an industrial buildup through scientific discovery, industrial entrepreneurship, and large-scale, broad-based infrastructure. By those means, our civilization is truly advanced economically. You as a community may survive in the short term off of some piracy, even for a few generations, but that will not be sustainable indefinitely. And what we're facing today, and this gets us really to the kind of the main strategic point, and then really we can open it up for questions, is that the panic that Jack Smith has regarding the legal warfare that Trump's pushing back on is the same panic that this entire global financial class has regarding a possible resurgence of the United States. That the problem they faced in 2008-9 only became an even bigger problem. They inflated what was a massive bubble that collapsed, was only reinflated now 10 times larger or 5 times larger. If we as the American people are able to recruit the average American to say, was that fair and just to loot us, to loot our incomes, to loot our taxpayer dollars, to bail out corrupt and bankrupt banks? Now, 10 years ago, it might be hard to say, well, it seems like things are better now. The stock market's back up, everything's working. But after 15 years since those bailouts, it's not that hard to see. Are young people optimistic of the future? No. Are they hopeless? Yes. Do they see no future for the economic perspectives? Yes. They don't see a future. They don't see a vibrant opportunity. They hope they can survive. There's increasing use of drug use. That's the effect of that criminality. And we are going to shut that system down. And we're going to replace it with what Trump has proposed as his Agenda 47, the building of new cities, the building of new industries, hives of industry, the Artemis space program. There will be no more powerful argument to make, especially to the younger generation of adults. I'm talking 30s and 40s, in some cases even in their 20s. Then this is the actual fundamental question determining our civilization and society today. We're not simply talking about regulating Wall Street in terms of, say, introducing Glass-Steagall. People may know that. We've talked about it before. It's a basic regulation to protect commercial bank accounts and saving accounts and so on. What we're talking about is ripping this parasitic worm off of our nation, because the problem today is that the worm is about 10 times bigger than the productive resources and productive activity of our own country. You've got a small little kind of human being with a worm that's practically, bloating the stomach out the size of a whale. It's time to rip the worm off. And it's that kind of commitment that is far more of a broad-based justification for the kind of anger most working class Americans feel. That injustice should never have happened. It cannot happen again. And there is no way. Trump himself in his Agenda 47 has said no more bailouts. It's not as if these aren't there. He's just not going to make the case of being he's not making an anti-campaign. But it is important for us to know that the ability to make the positive economic argument is tied with a very clear awareness that at core, you have to correct that criminal decision that we as a nation ultimately came to accept, even if we rejected it on the first vote and it was rammed down our throats by Cheney, Bush, and Obama, that we are going to correct that decision. We're going to hold the institutions accountable, not through punitive justice per se, but we were going to end this system of parasitic looting of the population, especially at major economic crisis points. Such a message in the minds and ears of the American people today is going to resonate. It's the same question for why the UAW was striking. that you've got to say, we're not going to let that happen anymore, but you have to drop this green BS, drop the EV mandates, drop these green obsessions, abandon the Democratic Party, join this MAGA movement. We're going to stick it to this parasitic institution that have destroyed everything from our weapons to our infrastructure, to our educational systems, to our hospitals, to the minds and well-being of our younger generations. They've looted it all. We're going to shut that parasitic system down. It's the basis by how the whole war machine operates. And we're going to replace it with this remarkably optimistic vision of what Trump has described as Agenda 47. We are at a critical juncture. We're about 5 weeks away from the January caucuses in Iowa, or maybe it's another 11 weeks from Super Tuesday. So you have about 11 to 12 weeks, and then this primary is over with, and Trump will then be mobilizing across the country for a general election. If we have the kind of clarity, and the reason I emphasize this, just to make it polemically maybe more clear, a lot of you on this call may be of the post-war generation, born sometime in the decade after World War II. And your sense of the Republican Party, or your sense of the Republican Party is not to necessarily take out the anger towards what we view as a capitalist system. But is it a capitalist system that lets foreign-funded private equity firms loot your military industrial companies, bilk your Pentagon, and loot and parasite off of infrastructure and the debt of the country through a central banking system? Is that what we mean by capitalism? Well, if that's what we meant by capitalism, then no wonder the younger people think we should be going towards socialism. It's by renouncing that system and renouncing the act that affirmed it, the most criminal and heinous theft and financial and economic crime, perhaps in human history. They certainly by a Republican form of government. By denouncing that we open up their ears to understand what we really mean by capitalism and the industrial process that's been unique to the American system and our nation. And I think we're at a critical and powerful juncture. If we take this hill, we take that message and that focus out in the increasing level of activities and mobilization, we can stop having to try to cajole a few members of Congress for doing something basically decent by having an overwhelming movement in the American people that brings a tidal wave of effect upon the decision-making in Washington. Because that, I believe, is what's necessary if we're going to strategically win this fight. You need that tidal wave of an overwhelming movement of the American people. And at core, this is what lies at the heart of the kinds of economic justice, real justice, of ending the 50 years of decline, the 50 years of environmental suffocation of every industry and power plant and production and space program we've done. Freeing up the American people to actually move forward aggressively. So that's what I wanted to present, to kind of take what we've done the last couple of weeks and pull it together, especially now as we go into this election, more and more into what is a very real election period. We're seeing a lot of activity in Michigan, in California, in Washington, and Texas, where we're active. We want to hear from you and also see what kind of engagement and new activations we can get in the coming weeks, especially as we get past the holidays. So Keisha, I'll leave it there and hand it back to you. It looks like we've got a few hands raised, but perhaps you have some thoughts as well.